Okay, today's daf we're learning is Pesachim Nun Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Marcia Baum in memory of her mother, Helena K. Baum, on her 5th year at site. Mom was a lifelong learner and lover of Torah studies, an anomaly for women of her generation. She is sorely missed by those whose lives she touched. Okay, I just want to remind you the course for gaining skills and learning Gemara has begun. Anyone who missed the first class, it's not too late. You can still listen. The course is a Hadron initiative in collaboration with Drisha. And tonight, I'm excited to say that we're starting the Hebrew. So anyone who wants to come on to the Hebrew class can come on to Hebrew. The curriculum is parallel. The materials are parallel, just some are translated into English and the Hebrew one is not. But it's a different teacher. So if people would like to learn with Rabbani Chana Gudinger-Dreyfus, who is a real Talmidah Chachama, you can join the class in Hebrew tonight. You can switch back and forth between the classes if you want to do 1 week with me, 1 week with her. If the timing works, that's also doable. It's the exact same curriculum. You won't be learning the same thing twice if you do that. Okay, with that, we're going to get started. We're very excited that there's so much interest. I think over 800 people, I checked a few days ago, I'm sure it's even more now, have registered between the two courses, and there's immense interest. It's great. 300 came on live, but even more are learning on their own. And hopefully this will be a tool that people can use. It will sit on our site for the long term. Anyone who wants to take a 10-week course to begin to start learning. And the hope is that over time, we'll do more mini courses like this to help advance people in their path to learning how to learn Gemara. Okay, we're going to start with Nun Bet Amud Bet at the bottom. We ended yesterday with Rabbi Eli, who cut wood from a tree on Shnat HaShemitah, even though there were little unripe dates on the tree. So how could he do that? So what we said was, how could he do it? Rav Nachman even called the part that goes around the fruit while it's ripening, he said, had the laws of Orla. Now, Orla and Shvi'it are different, but still it was called a fruit. So how could you say that? So we said, Rav Nachman must have held like Rabbi Yossi, and the rabbis must disagree with Rabbi Yossi. But now we're going to actually question, do the rabbis really disagree with Rabbi Yossi on this issue? So we're going to start with Matke flour of Shimi Minharda, about 6 lines from the bottom. Umi plige Rabbanan alei. Do the rabbis really disagree with him about this and think that unripe fruit is not considered fruit? Well, let's see. The Hatznan, it says in the Mishnah, Me'ematai en kotzitzina te'ilanot b'shvi. What we're going to have to do is prove. We're going to see this Mishnah. In this Mishnah, it seems clear that even an unripe fruit is considered fruit. And we're going to have to prove, though, that it must be the rabbis and not Rabbi Yossi, which we're going to do by process of elimination. We're going to say this can't be Rabbi Yossi because of something it says in here, which is then going to prove that it must be. Now, what did Rabbi Yossi say? Smadar. Smadar is the very early, the flower, when it flowers. What we're going to see here is that they're talking about already a fruit coming out, which is even later. Okay, and then therefore it's not going to be Rabbi Yossi, it's going to have to be the rabbis, and yet it's going to call an unripe fruit a fruit. So that's going to be where we're going with this. So from where can we not cut the trees on Shnat HaShemitah, on the sabbatical year? Beit Shammai omrim kol ilanot misheyotziu. Misheyotziu is when the fruit starts to emerge, which again is an early stage. Ubeit Hillel omrim hacharuvim. Now we're going to have the Beit Hillel talks about a few specific trees, and then he's going to talk about generally anything that doesn't fall into this category. Hacharuvim yishreshu, which means when they made a chain like, where Rashi says it starts to look like there's a chain of carobs. Okay, if you know the way carob trees grow, they're all over Israel. If you see them, they look kind of like they're chained together. V'hagfanim misheyagriu. The grapes, when they form kernels, okay, there's a bit of a debate exactly what stage this is. We're going to see, the Gemara is going to talk about it. They'll give a size to it, actually. But some people explain it's when they start having liquid in them. Some people say it's when you can see the seed through the grape, if it become that big. Vazeitim misheyanitzu. Okay, that's when it blossoms and the fruit starts to come out. Ushar kol ilanot misheyotziu. And then anything else, they agree with Beit Shammai, it's when the fruit starts to come out. The Amar Rav Asi explained about this Mishnah, hu boser, hu gerua, hu pula lavan. Okay, boser are these unripe grapes. That's the stage later than the smadar. And that's why we're going to say this clearly isn't Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi thinks it's when it's a smadar. But he says it's when when you already have the grapes, they're just unripe. And at what size they are, we're going to talk about in a minute. That's the same as gerua. So it says What he's doing is he's defining the wording. When it says Misha Yigra'u, that's what we know to be known as Boser, which is also what we know to be known as Hu Pula Lavan. When you say who this, who that, that means these are all equal. Pula Lavan, if you know, pul is like a bean type of thing. So something about this doesn't make any sense. Pula Lavan Sakadatach, what? How could a grape all of a sudden become a bean? It's not in the pul family. That makes no sense. Right? In Israel, they call it fight this fool. You get your hummus with fool. Okay, it's not, it has nothing to do with grapes. So I said, what are you talking about, fula lavan? So he says, Ela ema shiuro kefula lavan. Oh, it's size. We're talking about the size. The size is kefula lavan. Okay, and therefore we're going to say that that's the size that the grape becomes. So now. Uman shamat le'da'amar bosir in smadar lo. So who's the one who says that it has to be an unripe grape and not the smadar, which is the earlier stage? That's obviously Rabbanan, right? That's obviously the rabbis, not Rabbi Yossi, because Rabbi Yossi says the smadar. So this Mishnah clearly doesn't match Rabbi Yossi. It must match Rabbanan. And now what did we try to say? We tried to say that Rabbanan says only once it's a ripe fruit. This clearly isn't saying ripe fruits. This says from the early stages, when it's a small grape, you already can't cut it. And obviously the same, right? And when it said shar koli lanot, which is what he was cutting a palm tree, he was cutting the dates, misha yotziu, once the fruit starts to come out. So that's clearly, the rabbis seem to disagree with him. So now he couldn't have held like Rabbi Yossi and he couldn't have held like the rabbis. So how did he cut this? So they say, right? And if it's Rabbanan, bekatane shar koli lanot misha yotziu, which means he couldn't have cut the tree. So Ela Rabbi Eli, we now understand him in a totally different way. Instead of saying he held like the rabbis, no, there's really no opinion that says he was allowed to do this. So how did he do it? Oh, bidinis chane katz. He cut a tree that was a male tree. Right, I have one of these. I know, all right, you were laughing about everything's in my garden. So I have a fig tree in my garden that, right, I don't make up these stories, that I didn't understand because I don't understand so much from these things. For years, these figs grow and they never turn into anything. You can never eat them. And it was so frustrating to me, but it turns out it's a male tree. And that's the problem. The figs never become fruits. It looks like you're going to get figs, but they're not. So there you have it. So he was cutting a tree that was never going to ripen. I could cut that tree apparently, right, if I wanted without a problem, because it's not, right, first of all, there's two issues. There's number one, in the Shemitah, you're cutting the wood off the tree and then you're ruining the fruits. That's okay, because it's never going to be fruits anyway. There's also another thing about, it's forbidden in Israel to cut fruit trees, to cut them down entirely. There's issues about that, which again, if it's not a fruit tree, then it's okay. So that's not what the Gemara is talking about. I'm just adding something as an aside. Tanu Rabbanan, next Braita. Okay, we were talking, what was our real topic? We got off track. Our topic was this whole idea that in the Shemitah year, when there's no more fruits in the fields, you have to get rid of whatever fruits you have in your house. You can eat the fruits that grow in the Shemitah year as long as they're still outside for the animals to eat. So again, we're discussing at what stage do you know? Yesterday, we talked about these shalosh aratzot. We're going to see that there's different braitot with different words, with different definitions about when we say that this is the end of the time period and you're no longer allowed to have fruits of those types in your house. Ochlim ba'anavim, we're now going to have a list of grapes, and you're going to see, if you look at the chart on the sheet, I have it marked off between the first braita and the second braita, and we're going to say that two of them contradict. So right now you don't know that yet from the Gemara, but first they're going to quote this braita, then they're going to bring another one that contradicts with the exact same fruits, and then what is the time of kliyah, of being finished for each one. Ochlim ba'anavim, you can eat your grapes ad shechlu delayot shel ochel, until there's no longer grapes in, ochel is not food like it normally is, ochel is a city, okay, in the city of ochel. Ve'im yesh mu'charot mehen, ochlim alehem, but if there's some that are still growing, you can still eat. In other words, you go by this place, but if you happen to still have, then you're allowed to go even beyond that. Ochlim, it's kind of like, this is a marker, but it's not the only marker. You look out in the field and you see, but again, this is a classic case of, there's a rule that it's all very specific and dependent on you. On the other hand, we go back to, well, people need a framework. So let's give them a framework, and let's say it goes by this place to kind of make it easier for people to have a simple framework rather than being very particular into each situation, and it could lead to maybe problems. Ochlim zetim ad shechlei hacharon shebetkoa. So olives until the last one in Tekoa. Rabbi Eliezer Omer ad shechlei hacharon shel gush chalav. Gush Chalav is where? It's in the Galil. Where is Tekoa? It's in Yehuda, in Judea. So now those are nowhere near each other. It seems weird that there would be this machloket, especially we talked about yesterday. The Galil has their place and the Yehuda is their place. So what are we talking about? Well, this is a good example of the difference between the Schottenstein and the Koren. If you look at the Schottenstein, they know Tekoa is Tekoa nowadays, what Tekoa is. But in the Steinsaltz and the Koren, one of Steinsaltz's greatness was that he said we have to understand, in order to understand the Gemara, we have to understand the botany, we have to understand the geography, we have to look into it much more in detail than just simply, without really giving it much thought. So there's much more of a focus on those elements in that translation and that commentary. So therefore, there was research done, and Tekoa, apparently, there's also a city that was called Tekoa that was in the Galil, which makes a lot more sense in the context of the sugya that that's the city they're referring to. Now, then they explain what's the idea here. We want to Okay, the idea is that you want to make sure there's nothing in the fields, and it's how much is nothing. It's the amount that a poor person would go out and wouldn't find, not in the branches of the tree and not underneath the tree in the shade of the tree, a rova, a quarter of a kav. Once there's that little left in the fields, we're already going to say you have to get rid of what's in your house. And when it comes to figs, it's until the unripe ones in Beit Hini are finished. This is a little strange. Why we're talking about unripe? We're talking about eating. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda, lo izkaru pagei Beit Hini ela linyam maser. Now these must have been these edible unripe figs, okay? But still, it seems weird that we would use this as the marker for all figs. So Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, no, you're mistaken. This idea of pagei Beit Hini, they were mentioned, this place was mentioned not for these laws. They were mentioned linyam maser, that you actually have to take masrot from them. Now, here it says ditnan in parentheses. If you say it says ditnan, then you would have to say, and then the Gemara is stopping for a minute, going out of this Braita and quoting some proof for Rabbi Yehuda. Or this is really the Braita itself, and the words ditnan don't appear there because ditnan wouldn't appear in a Braita. Ditnan means, as we learned in a Mishnah, you wouldn't say that if you were sitting in the middle of a Braita. So what it must be is, this is just a continuation. And that's why they take out the word ditnan, continuing to say, pagei Beit Hini v'ahini ditovina, that's another type of unripe figs, chayavim b'maser. Okay, they're obligated in maser, you have to tithe them. Okay, so now we have that, that he's saying, pagei Beit Hini, those figs are not the ones that we're discussing. The hini ditovina is, I think they're dates, unripe dates. Okay, moving on. Rashba Gomer, ochlim, skipped a line. Now, the Braita continues, and we already quoted this continuation of the Braita yesterday. Ochlim b'tzmarim ad shichle ha'acharon shebetzoar. Okay, we go until the last one in Soar. Again, this is continuing in with the geographic locations. The last one in Soar. Soar seems to be, according to the Steinsaltz, by the Dead Sea, at the bottom of the Dead Sea. Ve'en ochlin al Rashba Gomer, ochlim al sheben akifim, ve'en ochlin al ben ashitzim. We discussed what exactly the machloka between them and the opinion before is the acharon shebetzoar means even on the ground. If they're on the ground, you still count it, whereas Rashba comes and says, no, only if it's in the leaves or in the branches, but once it falls to the ground, there's thorns at the bottom, and no animals are going to eat there. That's already considered that they're not available anymore to the animals. Okay, again, we learned that yesterday. Now you see that was taken from this bigger, longer Braita that described all sorts of locations and other elements, not just location, that would be an indicator that this is the time you have to get rid of everything in your house. Uriminhi, this contradicts the following source. Ochlim ba'anavim ad Pesach, b'zeitim ad ha'atzeret, b'golgrot ad Chanukah, b'tmarim ad Purim. This gives times of year, a very different way of doing things, right? This says grapes until Pesach, olives until Shavuot, grogrot, the figs, until Hanukkah, and dates till Purim. And Amar Abevi, Rabbi Yochanan, Tarte Batchayat Machlif. He says Rabbi Yochanan had a version that the last two were flipped, the dates until Hanukkah and figs until Purim. Okay, now, how do we relate to this? One gives locations and one gives times of year. That seems to be a total contradiction. So the Gemara says, and if you remember this is one of the answers we gave in the very first sugya, or the first daf of brachot, where we had different times that you say Kriyat Shema, and there's the times the Kohanim go, and there's times people eat, and there's the times, if you remember that, and there were some contradictions, and they say, oh, that's not a contradiction. They said, Idi b'idi chad shirahu. They just described it in a different way. One described it in this kind of manner, and another described the exact same time, but in a different way. So he says the same thing here, Idi b'idi chad shirahu. It's really one and the same. It's just that when are there no longer fruits in the following city at this time of year, okay? And really, there's no contradiction. Another way to resolve this contradiction, the first one said, but really, if they're still out there, then you eat them. In other words, again, none of this is clear cut. This is your guide. This is the border. This is when it ends. They're giving you guidelines, but in the end, if you still have fruits in the field, even if the date passed, or even if in that place they don't have, you obviously don't have to get rid of the ones in your house. So these are just guidelines, but therefore they don't really contradict because they're just meant as general guidelines, which aren't necessarily exactly accurate. Another source, this seems to be off topic a little bit, but since we're talking about where things grow and in which areas, so now they tell us that in certain areas, and now we're talking about topography, different types of topography, different things grow better. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Siman laharim milin. Okay, this is gall nuts. Gall nuts grow nicely in the mountainous regions. Siman la'amakim, in the valleys, the best thing that, right, the things that grow there the nicest are dekalim, or dekalim grow the best in the valley. Okay, the palm trees, the dates. Siman lenechalim kanim, reeds grow beautifully by the streams. Siman l'shvela in the is the shikma. The sycamore tree grows nicely in the shvela. I'm stumbling for the word. Can someone help me with the word for shvela? It's the I forget how you define that. The word is the plains. Okay, thank you. In the plains, the sycamore tree grows nicely there. Even though we don't have an exact proof for it, there's a reference to this in a verse, only to the last one. It says when it talks about the glory of Shlomo HaMelech and how, right, King Solomon, he had all this money and everything, and how great things were in his time. It says, the money was like stones, right? Everyone could access it. Say the eres, the cedar trees, which were considered the big, strong trees, they used a lot for building and other things, were like the sycamore trees in the plains. So there you see that sycamore tree, and then that larov, that there were tons of them, right? That's normally you find sycamores in the plains. So now they want to know, what do you do with this? What's the point of all this? Okay, why are they telling us? The Mishnah doesn't come, or the Braito don't come to just tell us, oh, here's some interesting information about topography. It comes for halachic reasons. So they say, Siman laharim milin, siman lamakim tkalim, nafkamina lebikurim. This is for when you bring your first fruits. You're supposed to bring, right, the best of the land, and you have to bring ditnan emivim bikurin ela mishivat aminim, velomi dekalim shabarim, velomi perot shabamakim. In other words, you have to bring them from where they grow the best. So if you have ones that are growing in the wrong place, then you shouldn't bring them because they don't grow well there. So that's not where you're supposed to bring them from. Siman lenechalim kanim. Okay, now we're not obviously talking about fruits, so we can't say that that's relevant. So what do we do with these reeds? Why is it important to know that reeds grow well by the streams? Nafkamina lenachaletan. Remember, in the laws of Egla Arufa, you're supposed to bring the animal. This is when someone dies in between two cities, and we don't, right, not in a city, and we don't know who killed the person. So we measure to find the closest city, and then the elders of that city come out and they go to a stream, a rough stream. And then the question is, how do you find what's defined as a stream? If you see there's reeds growing, then you know that it's a stream that you can do the Egla Arufa ceremony there. Okay, and then they say we weren't responsible, we didn't do this right, and it's a kind of way of atoning for the death of this person. Siman l'shvela shikma, what's the relevance of that? Shikma is not a fruit tree. Nafkamina lemekach umemka. If you sell someone an area in, let's say you say I'm selling you a field in the plains, and there's no sycamore trees there, you can claim that's not a good sale. I bought something in the plains. I wanted a sycamore, right? I assumed there would be sycamore trees there because that's normally what's there. To which the Gemara responds, it says, wait a minute, if you're giving that as your answer, hashadati lahachi, now that you gave that answer, this happens a lot, where after you give all these answers, they give this other answer, and then they say, oh, well, that's a good answer for all the previous ones also. You can explain all of these cases as, you sold someone something in the mountains and there were no walnuts there. The person could say, that's not what I wanted. I intended to buy, that's what normally you find in a mountainous region. So this isn't what I wanted. So therefore, you can go back and explain all of the others also that would be of halachic relevance. Makom, now new Mishnah. We're going to get into a few different Mishnayot today, different minhagim. Makom shenagu limkor behema daka lenochrim mochrim. Makom shenagu shelo limkor ein mochrim. If you live in a place where they sell small animals to Gentiles, like sheep and lamb and those kind of animals, then you can sell them. But in a place where nahagu lo limkor, not to sell them, you can't. Why would there be an issue to sell these kind of animals to Gentiles? So many reasons listed. I'll give you a bunch of them. One is there's a concern that they would engage in bestiality with these animals, because there was a concern in those days that there was a lot of bestiality going on. And therefore, and it's very interesting to say this, that there would be a problem of lifnei iver lo titei mechshol. You're basically causing someone to sin. It's very interesting because we're using this even when it comes to Gentiles, that you have to be responsible and not put a stumbling block in front of someone. Second option is you're taking this animal that if you kept the animal, you'd be obligated in all sort of mitzvot to give the first shearings to the Kohen, and to give the eldest to the Kohen. And there's all these laws associated with gifts to the Kohen that you're basically not going to be giving right now. And that's maybe a problem, right? None of these are real halachic issues, right? That's why even lifnei iver, it's not a real halachic issue because it's a Gentile, but there was a minhag not to do this so as, right, to keep away from this potential problem. Some people are concerned that maybe they'll sacrifice it to their gods. They sacrifice it to their gods, then you're somewhat responsible for that. And Rashi has a totally different approach, which is the concern is that if we allow you the small animals, you might sell the larger animals, which we're going to see in a minute, that the larger animals, that's why I ended with Rashi, are actually forbidden entirely. So now, so Gita, I see you're asking about the Noachide laws. So it could be that you might be obligated, that it's not, I'm not sure if lifnei iver, I think there's a debate about whether lifnei iver applies to the mitzvot b'nei Noach, to the Noachide laws. I don't remember, but it could be that there's a whole debate about that. Just because they are obligated in the 7 mitzvot might not be that lifnei iver is applicable to that. I don't remember all the issues about lifnei iver, but it's a very good question. Okay, so now the next line in the Mishnah is talking about things that are definitely forbidden according to everybody. And you'll find this a little surprising, I think, which is you can't ever sell large animals to Gentiles. Agalim usiachim, even small, like the young ones, right? These are the foals and the calves. Also those you can't. Shleimim ushvurim, whether they're whole or whether they're broken. They have broken bones. Rabbi Yehuda matir b'shvura, he has a different opinion. He says if they have broken bones, then you can sell them. And ben betera matir b'sus, he says a horse you can. So now we're going to talk about what the issue is here. The issue is what we call shvitat behema on Shabbat. Remember, your animal can't do work, right? Atah and your children and your behemtacha, your animals, also have to rest on Shabbat. So if that's the case, that your animals have to rest, what's the issue? If you sell it to a Gentile, well, it's not your animal anymore. Well, 2 possible issues. One is if we allow you to sell them, you might also rent them out or lend them out. If you lend them, then you're going to end up basically you're ending up having your animal work on Shabbat because it's still yours, even though you've rented it out or you've lent it. So therefore, that's a possible issue. Another possible issue is that the Gentile might renege on the deal, right? What happens? You take home something and then something's wrong with it. It's not working properly. You return it to the store. So even though you owned it in the middle, when it comes back, right? When it comes back to you, it's as if it was yours all along when he returns it, which means that potentially your animal could have worked on Shabbat and that will be an issue. So therefore, they didn't sell large animals to Gentiles. But Rabbi Yehuda allows it if the animal is maimed. Why if the animal is maimed? Because then the animal can't work. These are all, this is the difference between gasa and daka. The small animals don't work for you, right? The big animals plow and they do other things. They carry loads for you. So it's different when you're talking about a maimed animal who can't do that, therefore will be exempt from this issue. Ben Betera allows it with this horse because a horse, riding on a horse on Shabbat is a problem because you might pull off a branch to lead the horse, but it's not it's not considered work that's forbidden by Torah law. So therefore he says a horse is okay. Now, the Mishnah, the Gemara is not going to deal with these cases at all because they're dealt with in another case. I believe it's in Gitin, where it comes up about the Be'ema Gasam, Be'ema Daka, in the Sugyot about Darkei Shalom in the 4th parak. So therefore, the Gemara doesn't deal with it here. The last line of the Gemara is going to deal with, which is Makom shnagu le'echol tzli b'leilei Pesachim ochlim. Makom shnagu shelo le'echol ein ochlim. Place where people ate roasted meat on Pesach, you can still eat roasted meat. Place where they don't, you can't. So first of all, we all know that nowadays nobody eats roasted meat on Pesach, right? It's a thing. You don't eat roasted meat. What's the issue? Well, remember, the Korban Pesach was roasted. So we don't want people to think that you think that by eating roasted meat, you're basically eating the Korban Pesach. Okay, that's a potential issue. Here we're going to see it goes even more so. Now you have to think about it in the times after the Korban. So what's clear here, by the way, the fact that we don't eat roasted meat, it's clear that after the destruction, people were still eating roasted meat. It was only later that it became, and we're going to see this later on, we get to the 10th chapter also, about what their arba kushiot were, and you'll see. Anyway, there's a whole thing here about a roasted meat. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. So the Gemara starts off with this halacha that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, Asur lo la'adam shiomar basar ze lepesachu. Now, even though you can eat roasted meat, you can't say this meat is for Pesach, because even though you might be talking about for my holiday of Pesach, but it sounds like you're saying for the Korban Pesach. It looks like, even though you're not, looks like you're saying, I'm sanctifying this meat, and once it's sanctified, you're now eating it outside the temple because there is no temple anymore, and that's forbidden. So therefore, you can't say this meat is for Pesach. Rav Papa just specifies, kind of obvious, but he says it just spells it out. Dafka basal, specifically meat, not wheat. If you say this wheat is for Pesach, that's okay. You obviously mean for matzah, and you obviously mean I'm protecting it so that it doesn't become leavened. The mintar the pischa kama, right? What you're saying is I'm protecting this and watching it for Pesach. So now the Gemara says ubasar lo and meat not metive. Look at this source. We're going to see they ate meat, and now we'll wait and see the story, and then we'll see why they're bringing this as a contradiction. They're basically bringing it as a contradiction to what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, that if you say basar zeh lePesach, it's a problem. So, Meitive, Amar Rabbi Yossi, Todus ish Romi. We're now going to learn a little bit today about Todus. It was this person who lived in Rome. They would eat in Rome, okay, after the destruction, they would eat whole roasted animals. The way they ate the korban, they would roast the animal whole. Okay, normally we roast meat, we slice it, right? They would roast it whole. For Pesach, he would have them do that. Shalchulo, they said to him when they heard he was doing this, Ilmale Todus ata, if you weren't this great person Todus, okay, we're going to have to see what kind of great person was he. Gizarani alechani, do it. I would have excommunicated you. This sounds like yesterday. Remember, Talmidei Chachamim, we don't excommunicate. If you weren't a Talmid Chacham, we would excommunicate you for this. Why? Because you're feeding people sanctified items outside the temple. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. Kodashim sakadatach? He didn't sanctify the meat. He just said, this is what we're eating. No, the way you should read it is, it looks like, it's similar to, it looks like you're, by doing it exactly the way they did it, it looks like you're sanctifying meat and then eating it outside the temple. That's a problem. Now, what is derived from this story? Why were they upset with him? Not because it was any roasted meat, it was because it was whole roasted, right? He roasted the animal whole without cutting it. So mikulas in, she'en mikulas lo. It sounds like if you cut it up into slices, it's not a problem. But what did Rav Yehuda Amar Rav say? Any kind of meat you can't roast. So Amre, so the way they explain this contradiction is mikulas lo shna amar lo shna lo amar. If you're roasting it whole where it looks like the sacrifice, it doesn't matter whether you say this is for Pesach, this isn't for Pesach, no matter what, it's a problem. Remember, what he did was a problem. It was just they didn't excommunicate him because he was in Todus. But if he wasn't Todus, they would have excommunicated him. So then it doesn't matter whether you say this is for Pesach or not. Sheino mekulas, but if it's not mekulas, then peresh in lo peresh lo. If it's sliced meat, then it depends. If you said this is for Pesach, then it looks like you're doing these that you sanctified it. If not, not. So now we're going to have a bit of a zoom out. You probably didn't pay attention. This is always like that bus driver joke. What did it say in the beginning? Amar Rabbi Yossi. It was introduced by Rabbi Yossi said this story about Todus. So now the Gemara is going to say, and we're going to get off on a bit of a tangent. Rav Achamane la laha matnitin ke Rabbi Shimon. He taught that source that it was Rabbi Shimon who said it and not Rabbi Yossi. Matkefla Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet says this doesn't make any sense to say Rabbi Shimon, and we're actually going to reject it. Usually a bishlama structure kind of sets up a problem and then answers it. In this case, he's actually not going to answer it. It's one of the exceptions to the rule. According to Rabbi Yossi, this makes sense. And we'll see why in a minute later. But it doesn't make any sense according to Rabbi Shimon. And now we're going to quote Rabbi Shimon in a different situation. Rabbi Shimon potel. Rabbi Shimon exempts you in the following case. If you look in Rashi, Rabbi Shimon potel, that's a few lines above. If you say, I'm going to bring a voluntary meal offering of barley. Now, there is no such thing. There is a mincha offering of barley. That's for the minchat ha'omer, but that's not a voluntary offering. When you bring a voluntary meal offering, it's always from wheat. So if you say, I'm bringing a mincha from barley, then you don't actually have to bring anything, because he says, we take your entire statement seriously, but your entire statement makes no sense. You're saying something that's nothing. So basically, you're not obligated to bring anything. As he says, you didn't do it the way it's normally done. How does this relate to Todus? What did Todus do? He took the meat and he roasted it. When did the problem arise? When he roasted it. When did he roast it? When the animal was dead. When do you sanctify animals? Before you slaughter them. You always sanctify them before they get slaughtered. So he didn't do this like kederach hamid nadvim, right? This isn't volunteers, right? The volunteer, that's the voluntary offering of the meal offering. But here, he didn't bring the korban pesach the way, he wouldn't sanctify it the way it's always sanctified, which means that it certainly doesn't look like he's sanctifying it when he roasts it, because nobody sanctifies the animal when it's roasting. They always do it before slaughtering. So therefore, according to Rabbi Shimon, who says only if you offer something that could have been offered in a real way, right? If you say something that's real, then it will be a problem. He didn't do it in any way that would have ever been an issue. So it can't be that Rabbi Shimon thinks that what Todus did was wrong. So now they say, even according to Rabbi Yossi, it doesn't make sense. And now we're going to bring a different argument, a different machloket. So if you look down a bunch of lines down, Bishitat Rabbi Yossi Amara. Okay, here we're going to read Rashi a little bit. Damar b'Masechet Tmura, af bigmar dvarav adam nidbak v'nitpas. If you say something that contradicts itself, like this seorim, mincha mina seorim, we would call it an oxymoron, right? There is no such thing. So what if you say, harezo tmurat olat tmurat shlamim? Okay, you say this is going to be a replacement. This is a whole Masechet Tmura we're going to get you, where you substitute. You're not allowed to do a substitution. Once something's sanctified, an animal. But if you do, it's going to be valid anyway. But what if you say this is in place of an olah, this is in place of a shlamim? Now you can't do one animal in place of two different things. So Rabbi Meir says, if you say something, again, it's like contradicting. So we go by what you say at first. Harezo tmurat olah. We follow the first thing you said and we ignore the second part. But Rabbi Yossi says, af lashon, let me find the words. Rabbi Yossi, amar im lekach nitchavein tchila, hu'il v'lo yav shal otzi, right, whatever, v'tirad shetiste'ev. He basically says, right, he doesn't say the words here, but we say, af lashon acharon. In other words, we even go by the end. So what does he say? You're stuck, because it can't be in place of an olah, and it can't be in place of a shlamim, but it does count. And therefore you have to leave the animal to graze. In other words, the sanctity is on the animal. It's just that you can't do anything with it. So therefore you leave it to graze. Okay, but he basically says, we go by everything you said. We include everything. So if we include everything, right? So if that's the case, then again, he would say, okay, so if that's the case, in this case, again, we view, so now let's see. So he says, Hamarava. So now here comes the issue. It's not really such an issue for our case, but here comes the issue. Hamarava, Rava said, Rabbi Shimon b'shitat Rabbi Yossi amara. Now, Rabbi Shimon has to hold like Rabbi Yossi. Why? If Rabbi Shimon held like Rabbi Meir, that we only go by Lashon Rishon, then you would say, I'm bringing a mincha from barley. We would ignore the barley, take the mincha part, and you'd have to bring a mincha from wheat if we held like Rabbi Meir. So what do you see here? Rabbi Shimon clearly held like Rabbi Yossi. Here comes the jump. So Rabbi Shimon Shita Rabbi Yossi Amar Da'amar, here's the wording of it. It wasn't in Rashi, it's in the Gemara here. Da'amar af bigmar dvarav adam nitpas, right? He holds, if you say something that seems to contradict, we keep all of it, right? We take it all seriously. And then the question is, where do we go with it, right? Each case will be something different with the animal. So we're going to have to leave the animal to graze. In the case of the mincha minasa orim, we basically say, well, you didn't do it the way the mitnavim did it, therefore it's a useless statement. It doesn't mean anything. So therefore, they're going to make this jump. If my lavmi de Rabbi Shimon savar like Rabbi Yossi never savar like Rabbi Shimon. If Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yossi, then we can assume also Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Shimon. If Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Shimon, we're back to square one. If the Braita didn't match Rabbi Shimon, then the Braita also doesn't match Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so in the mincha case, right? Remember, Rabbi Yossi didn't talk about the mincha case. But we're assuming if he says af lashon hacharon, then if you say mincha minaseh orim, you basically said something useless because there's no such thing. But they say, lo, Rabbi Shimon savar like Rabbi Yossi, but Rabbi Yossi savar like Rabbi Shimon. No, you could say, he says you keep everything, but you did say mincha, it's both. So you said mincha, so you still have to bring a mincha. Maybe it's not really what you meant, but you have to bring it anyway. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says you don't have to bring it. So again, if Rabbi Yossi doesn't hold like Rabbi Shimon, then Rabbi Yossi could say, in our case, you sanctified something that wasn't kederach hamit nadvim. Oh, Rabbi Yossi, that doesn't bother him. So therefore, he would still see it as a problem, even though it was sanctified in a weird way. Once the animal was already dead, he would still think that this looks like kodashim b'chutz. Okay, so in other words, the fact that Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yossi doesn't mean that Rabbi Yossi holds like Rabbi Shimon, and therefore we could explain it according to Rabbi Yossi. Now we get to a little sidetrack to who Todus was and why they didn't want to excommunicate him. Todus ish Romi, Gavra Rabba Hava, was he an important person? Someone asked about this statement the last time we had it, Gavra Rabba. What exactly does it mean? Today you're going to see two different interpretations of it. Right now we don't yet know. Let's just assume. Was he a Talmid Chacham? That's the way we normally understand it. Oh, here's a great option. Oh, Bal Egrofim Have. That means literally a man of fists. Or was he a strong bully kind of guy? And that's why they want to excommunicate him, because if they did, he'd send his thugs after them and they were scared of him, right? There's different kinds of people that are considered big in this world. That's why, right, we saw Olam Hafuch, right? The Elyonim are down and the Tachtonim are up. Same idea here. You know, sometimes there's people who are big, strong guys with a lot of power. Was it just that he was powerful and that's why we didn't want to excommunicate him? Which again shows, interestingly, the rabbis, their approach, right? Who doesn't get excommunicated? The rabbis, we said, even if they do something wrong because we're worried about what it's going to, reflect on God. The other, right, thugs were worried about because they're going to beat us up. So Tashma, we're going to bring two sources to prove it, and each one is going to have a bit of a different definition of a Gavra Rabba, but in the end, we're going to say it wasn't that he was a strong, powerful bully. It was that he was an important person. Odzo darash todus ish Romi. Here we're going to connect a little to Parshat Shavua, and Gefet this week is specifically on this topic. Ma ra'u Hananiah, Mishael, va'Azariah shemasu asman al kedushat Hashem lekivshan ha'esh. Okay, in Sefer Daniel, we have Hananiah, Mishael, va'Azariah that throw themselves into the fiery furnace so as not to worship Nebuchadnezzar put up at Tselem, and they had to. So they basically threw themselves into the fiery furnace. So for what reason? So Rashi says, what's the issue? They should have said, V'chai b'hem, you're supposed to live by the mitzvot and not die by them. Tosfot asked this question, but isn't it Yered Val Yavor? And why not? There's a whole debate here, and this is what in Gefet, Rabbi Nichana Dreyfus goes into detail about. In any case, it says like this. Here's the Kal V'chomer they said. Very interesting Kal V'chomer. They're going to learn from the frogs. That comes up in this week's Parsha in the 10 plagues. Nasu Kal V'chomer batzmam mitzvardeim. They made a Kal V'chomer from the frogs. Umat tzvardeim she'em mitzuvin al kedushat Hashem. Okay, frogs are not commanded to sanctify God's name, and yet it says k'tiv b'hu ubau va'alu bebeitecha uvetanurecha uvemisharotecha. It says they're going to come into your houses, etc. And then it says, and in your ovens and in your kneading bowls. So now they say the fact that these two are juxtaposed, they say now your oven could be a hot oven, it could be an oven without a fire in it. When do you find these two next to each other, the kneading bowls next to the oven, when the oven's cold or hot? Obviously, when the oven's hot. Therefore, the frogs must have jumped into the ovens when the ovens were hot. Notice they're making this comparison with oven. They went into a furnace, a fiery furnace. So therefore, they sacrificed themselves to do the plague. Therefore, Hananiah Mishael v'Azariah said, oh, we also need to. Very strange Kal V'chomer. I'll leave it for you to think about, and you can listen to Gefet if your Hebrew is good and hear what Chana Dreyfus has to say about this. So us, we're commanded to sanctify God's name all the more so, and that's why they said we must have to go into here. Okay, so that's one. Now, what does this teach us? What's the connection? Todus made a drasha. That means he must have been a Talmid Chacham. Second option, Rabbi Yossi bar Avin Amar Matil Malai Lekishal Tamidei Chachamim Haya. He was someone who gave loans or business stuff he gave Tamidei Chachamim items to sell, rent, all that. To basically, he was a startup, right? He helped people start up businesses, and he specifically helped Tamidei Chachamim. So what do you see here? Anyone who does this gets to go up to the high heavens. Okay, they connect chokhmah and kesef, and one who helps, right? Exactly, a rabbinic venture capitalist. And what he did was, they're saying he was great, not in terms of his Torah knowledge, but the fact that he helped support Talmidei Chachamim, and that's just as important. Which again shows you Gavra Rabbah could be either someone learned, or it could be someone who helped Talmidei Chachamim. Okay, last thing for today. Mishnah. Makom shenagu la'adlik et haner b'leilei Yom Kippurim madlikim. Makom shenagu shelo la'adlik ein madlikim. We're going to see that some people lit candles, some people didn't. Okay, this sounds like, right, we all light candles on Yom Kippur night. Not so clear that they always did it. We'll see in a minute what the issue is. Umadlikim, but for sure you light b'batei knesiot u'batei midrashot, in the shuls and in the learning study houses, ubevavot ha'afelim, in dark alleys, v'al gabei cholim, and near the sick people. What's the issue? So they don't exactly say this explicitly because they don't always like to discuss things like this explicitly. Tana, ben sha'amru, so the Gemara quotes a braita, ben sha'amru la'adlik u'ben sha'amru shelo la'adlik, shnehem l'davar echad nitkavnu. They both had the same motivation. This is different from the other minhagim, that some people were more stringent and some people weren't more stringent. But the issue is they were both being stringent here. Okay, they were both trying to upkeep something else. What was it? That on Yom Kippur night, husband and wife are not allowed to be together. So they wanted to either have light in the room, because when there's light in the room, you're not allowed to have sexual relations. So therefore, that would prevent them from sleeping together. Or the alternative is if it's dark, then they won't be able to either. So either which way, it was to minimize sexual relations between husband and wife. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Darash Rava. Okay, here he's just going to give a drasha for the same thing. The Amech Kulam Sadikim La'olam Yirshu Aretz, right? If you know the famous song, right? So your nation, they're all tzaddikim. They're all going to get inheritance, because even the ones who light and even the ones who don't light, they all, as we're going to say right now, ben shamru la'adlik, ben shamru lo la'adlik, either which way, shnehem lo nitkavnu ela davar echad. They're all trying to do the right thing, just in a different way. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Now we're going to have the statement that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel. Ein mevarchim ala or ela b'motzei Shabbat. The only time you light a candle in Havdalah is on Saturday night, not on Motzei Chag, not on Motzei Yom Kippur. Okay, we do it on Yom Kippur, so hold off on that. Ho'ilu tchilat briatohu. What's the reason? Because that was when fire was created, on Saturday night. It's also, by the way, you don't do it if you make Havdalah on Sunday. Let's say you forgot to make Havdalah, so you also don't do the candle. Amar le'ahu Saba v'item Rabba bar bar Chana, either an elderly person or Rabba bar bar Chana said it. Yaisher. Okay, that's a good thing you just said. V'chein amar Rabbi Yochanan, and thus Rabbi Yochanan said the same thing. Now we're going to hear a story. Ula havarachiv chamra va'azil. He was riding on a donkey. V'habashakav va'azil Rabbi Abba mimine v'Rabba bar bar Chana mismale. So Ula's going. Rabbi Abba's on his right side. Rabbi bar Chana's on his left side. Maybe this is indicative. Left is always the worst. We're going to see. He's got a bit of an issue with Rabbi bar Chana. Amarle Rabbi Abba le'Ula. He says to Ula, Vadai da'amaritu. Is it really true what you say? What you said, Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan, Ein mevarchin ala or ela b'motzei Shabbat. Is it really true what you said, that Rabbi Yochanan said you only light the candle on Motzei Shabbat? Ho'il tchilat briatohu, because that's when it was created, fire. So what's Ula's reaction? Hadar Ula, and we'll talk about this more tomorrow. Chaza bei Rabba bar Chana bishut. He gives a really nasty, dirty look at Rabba bar Chana, as if like Rabbi Abba was accusing him of saying something in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. He never said. Rabbi bar Chana must have been the one who said it. And as he realizes, if I didn't say it, it must have been Rabbi bar Chana, who was his, one of Rabbi Yochanan's main students. And he looks at him like, how could you possibly have said that in the name of Rabbi Yochanan? It's clearly wrong. So he stares at him and looks at him, and he's really angry, but he doesn't say anything. And Rabbi bar Chana immediately understands, so he jumps to defend himself. Amarle, ana lava ha amare. I didn't say it about that. Don't accuse me. Even though he didn't really accuse him, but he did by his look. Ela aha amare. But I said it about the following. Titane tana kamei to Rabbi Yochanan. Someone brought a bright in front of Rabbi Yochanan that said the following. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Homer, Yom HaKippurim shechal yot b'Shabbat, af b'makom she'amru shelo la'adlik, madlikim mipnei kvod HaShabbat. If Yom Kippur falls on Shabbos, even though normally this goes according to those who held that you don't light candles on Yom Kippur night, you still light because of Kfar Shabbat. So Kfar Shabbat overrides this reason not to light candles on Yom Kippur night, because so that the couple doesn't sleep together. So when the student brought this in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Ane Rabbi Yochanan Batrei, he answered, V'chachamim osrim. He said no, but the rabbis forbid it. In other words, this is fascinating, right? You would never think that this would be the case. We always light candles on Yom Kippur, and especially Friday night. He says on Friday night, if Yom Kippur falls on Friday night, you do not light candles. That's what I said, Rabbi Yochanan said. I wasn't talking about Havdalah. Amrlei, Ula's reaction is Ada Tehei. That I agree with. Okay, so now he's not upset with him anymore. We're going to see Rav Yosef's response tomorrow to the actions of both Ula by staring at him and Rabbi Rachana, who figured out what exactly he was referring to. So we'll end here for today and we'll pick up with that tomorrow. Have a great day.